Well, very happy indeed. I think Gibraltar has been singled out as having been one of the territories, one of the jurisdictions that has really stepped up to the plate, that has ensured that we are keeping to the global standard, that we are acting to demonstrate that Gibraltar has always been committed to transparency, and when called upon to change our legislation, we have been ready to do so in order to ensure that nobody can genuinely and objectively criticize Gibraltar or the regulatory standards that we apply.
You must be pleased that the Prime Minister praised overseas territories for their commitment to transparency at such a high-profile event.
I'm in particular pleased that he held out Gibraltar for singular distinction on a number of occasions by saying that Gibraltar had been one of the territories that had acted quickly. You saw that Philip Hammond said yesterday that Gibraltar was not in the dock. Gibraltar was an example of how other territories and other nations should be acting. And today what David Cameron has said, which I think is absolutely right, is that the United Kingdom and its overseas territories and crown dependencies are very much ahead of the game, ahead of most nations in Europe and many nations in the world. So he reminded us that there are 5 nations that have committed to a public register of beneficial ownership, and some other nations that have committed to central registers of beneficial ownership, and some to exchange them. We are one of those. And he also reminded the world that they need to look at other larger nations like Russia, like the United States, like some European nations that are not yet committed to a central register, that are not committed to exchanging that central register. I think that makes the case very well indeed for the easy and negligent approach that some are taking, which is simply to say that the overseas territories are the problem. The overseas territories have demonstrated that we are at the cutting edge, Gibraltar in particular.
And that point was made by the political leaders of the Cayman Islands and also the Isle of Man, who said that many of the small nations who are often picked upon are actually doing quite well now on transparency.
We're not just doing well, we are well ahead of the game. We're in the top pack of the top 50 nations in the world taking the step forward. There are 5 that are also going to make those registers public, but the top 50 are going to have central registers and are going to exchange those registers. And we are on that list of early adopters. I think that demonstrates where we are. But look, the world is too often strong with the weak and weak with the strong. And David Cameron has today made the case why that is unfair, in particular in relation to the overseas territories, in relation to transparency. And Philip Hammond yesterday made the case of why Gibraltar should never be lumped in with anybody else other than with the leading edge, the pack that is really ahead of the game.
So, among other things, the Panama Papers have given finance centres quite a bad rap. To what extent do you think it's possible for a jurisdiction to have a finance centre but to also be completely committed to transparency?
Well, I think you must have a complete commitment to transparency if you're running a serious financial services centre. Look, there are serious financial services centres in large nations and in small nations. The most serious in the world is the one we're standing in now, the United Kingdom and London. Another one may be New York and Frankfurt in Germany. So you don't have to be a small island or a small jurisdiction in order to be a financial services centre. What you have to do is to be committed to the cutting edge standard of regulation. Now, the things that matter for Gibraltar are quality, regulation and reputation. That is what has built our financial services centre, it's what built our gaming industry. And I think the case has been made today more clearly than it has ever been made before. That the centres that are really harbouring corruption are not the overseas territories, certainly not Gibraltar, that the fight against corruption, against organised crime is really in states whether or not there are financial centres there. I mean, the presidents of Afghanistan and Nigeria were present. They talked about them having a lot of corruption in their nations and the changes they need to make in their nations and in nations beyond their frontiers to tackle that corruption. The world is now globalized, and the globalized world in which we live today, which so many of us reap the benefits of, also requires global financial services. And the expertise is there in territories like the United Kingdom, the United States and Germany, which I mentioned before, and in small states like Gibraltar, like some of the other overseas territories and the Crown dependencies, to be able to provide the financial services that the world needs, moving at the speed at which the world needs them to move, and also being able to counter the abuse of that financial system, which is global too, at the speed at which criminals may use it. So that is the challenge. It is important that law enforcement is able to counter the speed with which crime moves today, with which crime can move money around the world. It's important to commit ourselves to an anti-corruption agenda, to all of the things the Prime Minister was talking about today, all of which are the opposite of anathema to us. They are actually what we believe and what we stand for and what every Gibraltarian Gibraltarian would expect that their government would be signing up to. So this is not an issue that Gibraltar is going to turn its back on. This is an issue Gibraltar wants to be recognized as being a leader on.